Equal pay for equal play. Americans are backing the U.S. women's national soccer team in its fight to make as much money as their male counterparts. More than two-thirds of Americans, 68%, believe that the women's team deserves the same pay as the U.S. men's national team. Now, that's according to a new poll from Public Policy Polling. 17% disagree. Now, 5 of the biggest names on the U.S. women's national soccer team roster, including Hope Solo and Carly Lloyd, recently filed a federal wage discrimination complaint against the governing body for soccer within the United States. The complaint against the U.S. Soccer Federation asserts that there is a 25% gap between what the top male players and what the top female players can make. The 3-time world champion U.S. women's team were paid $2 million for their World Cup win in 2015. The U.S. men's soccer team made $17 million for their 2014 defeat. For more on the wage discrimination against male and female athletes in the U.S., we're joined by Wendy Patrick. She is an attorney and business ethics professor at San Diego State University. Wendy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Wendy, the U.S. women's national soccer team is taking a stand against lower pay, lower per diems, and overall lower support compared to their male counterparts. 5 members, as we mentioned, including Hope Solo and Carly Lloyd, on behalf of the entire team, recently filed a federal wage discrimination complaint against the U.S. Soccer Federation. Wendy, where does that matter stand now?
Well, actually, it's working its way through the system. It's all about leveling the playing field, both literally and figuratively, because remember, that's one of the places that there is a difference. When you talk about salaries, I mean, look at what we're talking about. We're talking not only about money, but also about different kinds of conditions, whether or not it's per diems, whether it's hotel accommodations, travel. It begins to be not so much about revenue, but also about respect. And women want to be treated just as well as the men. In other words, it's true that success drives salaries to some extent, but there shouldn't be such a thing as popularity pay when it ends up being unfair for women when, as you mentioned earlier, they're doing the same thing, they should be getting the same amount of money.
Wendy, there are certainly many facts to show a discrepancy. How likely are they to win?
Well, they've won in other professions, so I would say they have a very good chance. And in fact, there's many professions where it's easier to really look at the kind of work people are doing. And I understand the counter argument, right? As a lawyer, I can argue both sides of almost any issue. And some of the arguments have to do with the fact that is it really the exact same thing when you look at men's sports versus women's sports? The women would say, yes, it is. In fact, sometimes they would say they're working even harder. But because so many other professions have successfully leveled the playing field when it comes to salaries, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do the same thing for women athletes.
All right, so if they do win, what kind of monetary compensation can they expect?
Same as the men are getting, and that's the argument that they're making. But not only that, Michelle, that's where we start, because there's other things besides salary. They're going to talk about surrounding conditions. And are the surrounding conditions fair? I mean, salary, like I said before, there are things such as travel, per diem, there's different kinds of leave balances that men and women are allowed to take. They would probably want equality in all of those things, because the word I mentioned before, respect, has been something that is cited by the women going through this lawsuit, and many similarly situated women who are also complaining that they're just not treated as well as their male counterparts.
Well, you know, Wendy, the argument can be made that female athletes get paid less because they generate less revenue, because there's less interest in watching them play, and that men's sports teams do deserve a financial edge because they do bring in bigger crowds and they generate more money in ticket sales, corporate sponsorships, TV broadcasting rights. What do you say to that?
Well, that is what is being argued, but the women that are suing, you can imagine how they feel about this. They have, in the last couple of years, brought in enormous amounts of revenue, yet the playing field still is not leveled. So it almost is counterintuitive to suggest that it's directly tied to that. Back to the argument of popularity pay. Revenue is something that has really come in as far as women's sports have gone. There's incredible interest, and there especially was in 2015, yet the conditions still are not fair. They're still not equal. And one more thing, you probably could make that argument in general, but it probably doesn't hold a lot of weight with the women that are working out on the playing field. They believe that they should be getting the same amount of money for working the same hours and sometimes working even harder.
Well, the point could also be made that if the same amount of money was spent in promoting them, that more people would then attend the games.
Absolutely.
Now, Wendy, in tennis, the playing field has been leveled, but it's quite a recent phenomenon. Only in 2007 did Wimbledon become the last Grand Slam to award the same prize money for male and female champions. How is that working out? Is that a model that other sports should perhaps be following?
It is a model other sports should be following, but it's been a long time coming. Remember back to the days of Billie Jean King. I mean, there have been so many gradual successes and achievements in achieving equality in women's tennis. It's a great model to follow, but here's the counter argument somebody would make, and I'm sure somebody has made it. Women's tennis is incredibly popular. So somebody might say, well, we're going to take a sport that already is generating a lot of attention and use that as a standard bearer. But why shouldn't we? Because it seems to be the case that when you talk about prize money, when you talk about salaries, revenues, and all the different ways we seek to compensate our male and female athletes, it should be the case that we look to something as successful as the tennis model and decide whether or not all sports shouldn't come a long way, as we say, as women's tennis has.
Wendy, the focus of this particular case is in the U.S. women's soccer team against the U.S. Soccer Federation. But how do women's athletes compare pay-wise to the rest of the world in terms of men versus women?
It's a great question, Michelle, because the answer is it depends on the country, and culture counts. We have seen in so many professions that women and men are viewed very differently in different cultures. And along with that difference in the way we perceive women and men is also the way we perceive whether or not they deserve the same salary. It's a sad fact that there are places in the world where we wouldn't be having a lawsuit like this with women seeking to be paid the same. We're lucky we live in a culture where we actually do want to level that playing field. So that's a long-winded way of saying that it really is different in different cultures, and we see a lot of fairness and a desire really among both men and women to have a fair pay scale here in the U.S.
We'll see if some progress is made after this particular case. Thanks so much, Wendy Patrick, attorney and business ethics professor at San Diego State University.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.